up just as you wish
We're
and
gonna do-
tell us when you're ready.
Okay, I think we're ready. Are you guys ready? Oh,
Yeah, okay,
here's
take it
Barbara.
away. You have as long as you need.
Are we starting?
Yes.
Oh, excuse me then.
Right now?
Yes. I guess you already did the preliminaries? I guess so. Okay. So greetings, everybody from Hiroshima, Japan. We just did. Okay. All right. Thank you. So I'm here with Barbara and very glad to see you all. Now, we've been having an inspirational time, one filled with both sadness and great concern for the state of the world today, and at the same time, one laced with hope for the future. A hope based on the promise of the possible and fed by the energy of thousands of Japanese peace activists of all ages and many backgrounds. We're here to commit themselves. Um, we're here to commit themselves to solidarity in their and our struggle to control the spread of nuclear weapons, and all to set the groundwork to clear the path to a world free from the threat of nuclear weapons for good. Now, we've already had quite a time after 13 hours in the air and more than one international airport, and what sounded like an interesting train ride for your favorite trainophile Barbara here. We were greeted by Kazuki Kondo, a staff person for Jinsuken, which is a labor union and public advocacy organization of nearly 1 million members, dedicated to, among other things, the ongoing control of the spread of nuclear weapons, and one day, their elimination. Now, before I go on, I just want you to know that Barbara's going to have a little talk of her own as we're done, when I'm done, just so you know what to expect. And I'm going to be doing some screen shares too, so you'll let me know if that doesn't work. Now, as many of you remember in previous talks I gave at Pebble, the elimination of nuclear weapons may seem like a pipe dream, but we know it is possible because of all the successes we've had in reducing stockpiles of nuclear weapons, both deployed on missile sites, in bombers, and in submarines the world over, from a high of some 70,000 nuclear weapons down to around 12,000 today. But I've also spoken before on the disturbing fact that as a world, we are now going in the wrong direction with nuclear armed countries currently at war and facing off with possible new war between countries possessing nuclear weapons that until now, since the end of the Cold War, have avoided direct confrontation and all-out war. They avoided it by talking with each other, even as they faced off in proxy wars at various times and places across the planet in order to avoid escalation, leading to exchanges of nuclear weapons. The leadership of the US and the USSR talked to each other. They used diplomatic means to avoid direct war. A war, as we all know, would have ended humans and all we have brought into being for all time. Now, despite ideological differences and deep suspicion of the other, they talked with each other and prevented the worst possible outcome between their two countries, our two countries. Now, some would argue that this balance of power, this mutually assured destruction, a policy adopted to prevent nuclear destruction, was a policy called MAD because to use such weapons would indeed truly be insane. Now, some would argue that it was the very existence of weapons so destructive and so deadly that they threaten the entire species, as well as many others, of course, that thought of using them at all kept nuclear armed nations from going to war with each other. The state of the world today challenges that assumption. Not only that, but as I pointed out before, we have almost nearly had nuclear war in the past simply by accident. So here's just two examples, and then there are others, of course. So in 1962, the Soviet Union, an intelligence officer, I touched on this one earlier, Pentovsky was his name, I believe, Colonel Oleg Pentovsky. He was recruited by British and US intelligence as a double agent. However, Pentovsky was under surveillance. This isn't the same guy I mentioned last time. This is a different incident. And he was arrested in October 1962. He had been given a code by which to warn his handlers, right, in England, or actually it was in England, if the Soviet Union was ready to attack the US, was on the verge of an imminent attack. And he was to call twice, 1 minute apart, and only blow 3 short breaths each time. And that would, let MI6 in England know that we were about to go to nuclear war with the Russians. So he called The call went into the MI6 head of station, a guy named Gervas Cowell at the United Kingdom Embassy in Moscow. However, Cowell used his judgment and decided not to inform London and Washington, as he should have done, because he just judged correctly that Pentosky had been arrested and his codes had been broken, and decided not to act. So we avoided a nuclear war there because somebody kept his head on his shoulders, right? He didn't get carried away or panic. In September 1983, the Soviet Union had a Serpukhov 15 is what this was called, was an early warning system incident. So on the night of 25 September 1983, Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav, I can't pronounce his name, Yevgarovich, oh, that was it, Petrov, saw incoming data reporting that the United States had launched 5 intercontinental ballistic missiles at the Soviet Union. What stood out to Petrov, as usual, was that as unusual rather, was that the U.S. had launched only 5 missiles, far fewer than Soviet strategic doctrine believed was likely as part of a first strike. He also had reservations because the system could not identify the missiles' jet trails and therefore could not confirm their presence. So he ultimately reported the incident as a false alarm rather than going into gear and launching nuclear weapons back. Now remember, back then they only had a few minutes to respond because these things would, depending on where they were located, could reach the other country in like 20 minutes. And of course, there are other examples, but we've come close to nuclear war many times. If it had not been for the intervention of sane, rational people who questioned what they were witnessing, we might have had that nuclear war. Now, there are serious plans being discussed by the US and Russia, and maybe other nuclear powers, to put AI into the equation. Not a very reassuring thought. Just think of incidents such as these that took place at a time when the Soviet leadership, say Yeltsin, was notified that there was a false alarm at a time when he was drunk. I mean, it came out later that Yeltsin was he was a known alcoholic. Or if it had been Nixon in one of his darker, more paranoid moments at the White House when he was hunkered down waiting for impeachment hearings to be called, right? When he was, he was also hitting the sauce. He had been drinking a lot toward the end of his time as president. So fallible systems run by fallible people are capable of destroying the world, and they're not things that we should take lightly. Now, why, you might ask, do we even have these things in the first place? I'm sure most of you know the story about the Manhattan Project. It was originally developed as a preventative program to beat Hitler to the development of a nuclear weapon. Now, think of that. Hitler with a nuclear bomb? Just sit with that for a minute. We now all know that it was discovered that the Nazi scientists failed in their attempt. And we found out before the first nuclear test was ever done. So we knew that we'd already won the race. It has been argued that we had to complete the project because the war in the East with the Japanese made it necessary. That we saved thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands of US lives of service people who were preparing for the planned invasion of the Japanese home island. But what if that was not true? What if an invasion was not really needed? Should we then have dropped the bomb on people to stop a war that may have ended without such an invasion? So in Gar Alpovitz's book, The Decision to Use the Atomic Bomb, we find a strong argument against the need to drop the bomb.
Hey, David,
Yes.
excuse me. Could you keep that little bit slower pace that you adopted just a while back? So when you are enthusiastic, you start talking fast. So kind of pace yourself, okay? So we can all.
Thank you for letting me know. It's been a long day.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. I'm so sorry.
No, I'm glad you called me on that. We've been marching. I was speaking in front of 1,000 people, 2,000 people earlier today, so I'm just rambling. So forgive me about that. As I was saying in this book, The Decision to Use the Atomic Bomb, we find a strong argument against the need to drop the bomb. The book is filled with examples and a meticulous reconstruction of Truman's thinking and the political reasons that eventually inspired him to take action with such a monstrous weapon. So in the interest of brevity, I will pick only a few of the more salient points. So one, Chief of Staff, Presidents Roosevelt and Harry Truman, right? This is William Leahy. He was an admiral. And this is a quote from him. "It is my opinion that the use of this barbarous weapon at Hiroshima and Nagasaki was of no material assistance in our war against Japan. The Japanese were already defeated and ready to surrender because of the the sea blockade and the successful bombing with conventional weapons. The lethal possibilities of atomic warfare in the future are frightening. My own feelings was that being the first to, in being the first to use it, we had adopted an ethical standard common to the barbarians of the Dark Ages. I was not taught to make war in that fashion, and wars cannot be won by destroying women and children. So that was William Leahy. According to Gar Alpovitz in his book, The Decision to Drop the Bomb, on page 635, he tells us, after relating several communications between the Japanese and the Soviet embassy and other sources, that the Japanese were prepared to negotiate all the way from February 1945 up to and before the time the atomic bombs were dropped. If such leads had been followed up, there would have been no occasion to drop the atomic bombs. And this is Leahy's quote. Add to the fact that we know that as far as military leaders in the Japanese army felt, their overriding goal to stop the war and surrender was that they be allowed to keep the emperor, who, among other things, would be needed to give the order for the Japanese to stop fighting. Everywhere they had troops stationed in the broader Pacific theater. We further learn that, according to William Manchester, the biographer of General Douglas MacArthur in his book American Caesar, General MacArthur's reaction to the issuance of the Allies, by the Allies, of the Potsdam Proclamation to Japan. Potsdam Declaration in July demanded that Japan surrender unconditionally or face prompt and utter destruction. Now, MacArthur was appalled. He knew that the Japanese would never renounce their emperor, and without him, an orderly transition to peace would be impossible anyhow, because his people would never submit to Allied occupation unless he ordered. Ironically, when the surrender did come, it was conditional, and the condition was a continuation of the imperial reign. Had the general's advice been followed, the resort to atomic weapons at Hiroshima and Nagasaki might not have been necessary, and they agreed to the Japanese main concern anyway. Norman Cousins, he was a magazine editor. He was also one of the founders of my organization when it was the Committee for a Sane Nuclear Policy. He was a consultant to General MacArthur. And during the American occupation of Japan, he worked for him. Cousins writes of his conversations with MacArthur, MacArthur's views about the decision to drop the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki were starkly different from what the general public supposed. He continues, when I asked General MacArthur about the decision to drop the bomb, I was surprised to learn he had not even been consulted. What I asked what his advice had been, he replied that he saw no military justification for the dropping of the bomb. The war might have ended weeks earlier, he said, if the United States had agreed, as it later did anyway, to the retention of the emperor. So that's from Norman Cousins' book, The Pathology of Power. There's more examples I can give you. There was even a military commission set up to advise Truman of the state of the Japanese toward the end of the war. And they advised him that an invasion would not be needed, and that the blockade already underway of the island would force them to capitulate as their supplies dried up and their ability to fight diminished. Okay? So besides the many, many conventional bombing runs of Japan that had already pulverized most of the military targets and many of the cities so badly that Truman finally did choose to use the weapon, the military had a hard time finding a target. So after another argument was that once the Soviets came into the war, which they decided to do, in part to get their piece of the action, and after the Potsdam Conference, also to counter US influence in the world after the war, Truman knew that the bomb had been successfully tested by them, and that this would be enough to get the Japanese to surrender. Now, part of Potsdam was to talk the Soviets into coming into the war because he knew that it would bring the war to a quicker conclusion. Right? So this is Truman. Then he finds out we have the successful test of nuclear bomb, and he changes his mind. Right? And it has been argued that his ultimate reason to use it was to counter Soviet influence, just as the Soviets felt they needed to counter ours. And so the bomb was dropped. Now behind me is the atomic bomb dome as it stands today. Can you all see that?
Yes, we
can you see
can.
that?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, we do.
It's surrounded by Hiroshima, which is a vibrant, healthy, modern city. During our stay here, Barbara and I have met many intelligent, generous people who have been nothing less than gracious as hosts and as curious human beings. I'm not sure you're going to be able to see this in the dark, but I'm just going to pan this around, right? We're in this beautiful park by the river, right? And there's just buildings and cities and
Yes,
people
we do
drive
see
through.
it. We do see it. And we see lights, lots of things lighted up.
There's trolleys that run through the town. You can get around. There's all these great little taxis that you can get around wherever you want to go. There's great little stores. It's just a wonderful place. I love it here. The first atomic bomb in human history was exploded here at an altitude of about 150 meters southeast of the Hiroshima Prefectural Industrial Promotion Hall. That's that. That's the dome, right? It was about 600 meters from there. The pressure of the blast was 35 tons per square meter. The wind speed was 440 meters. And the building was wrecked by the blast and the heat rays and burned down by blowing fire from the ceiling. Since the blast worked almost vertically, the central part of the main building miraculously escaped the collapse. And there were other buildings that stayed up too, I found out. I was kind of surprised, but not too many. Most of it was flattened. But everyone who was in that building died instantly after the war. The remnants of the former industrial promotional hall came to be called the Atomic Bomb Dome by citizens due to the shape of the top, the canal, and the steel frame. We assembled here today, thousands of people, to make sure that this never happens again. And in truth, for whatever the real reason Truman dropped the bomb, all that really matters is we never use them again. We must never use these monstrous weapons again. I was going to show you pictures of what the place looked like after the bomb was dropped, but you've probably seen them in books, and I don't feel any reason to do that now. So that's what I have to present. I'm thinking we let Barbara talk first, and then we'll both take questions and answers. Does that sound good?
That sounds perfect.
Barbara?
Hi, everyone.
Hey, Barbara.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Good. Konnichiwa. We've just been here 24 hours, and I've been very moved, and I'm going to talk about that experience. A short way down the river is the first place we went with our host is the Memorial Museum. Alan, I don't know if the slides are up and whether I can see them.
Yes, they are. Do we need to do a screen share or how's that work?
No, you don't need me to do a screen share. I'll try to remember what order I put them in. I think it was the front of the museum. And then we only had a short time to go through. We're going to go back and finish it. But and I think many of us have probably seen or heard of the stories of what, happened to people. The next slide, for some reason, is a tree, the trunk and the branches of a tree. And for some reason that touched me. We also saw pictures of people, the dead and the wounded, the people with radiation sickness. Read lots of stories about what happened and what people were suffering from. This river that David showed you, a lot of people were so burned that they just ran and jumped in the river, and then they couldn't stay afloat, and so there were a lot of bodies in the river. There were also stories of people who were called to help, doctors, rescue workers, and they came from the nearby, not understanding, not knowing that the radiation would affect them, and so many people, like weeks and months later, became sickened, and we saw pictures of what that they looked like, and we read about their suffering. And then it brought me back. Well, what I've become aware of, and then all day talking with people, is how, in particular, in Hiroshima, and I imagine Nagasaki as well, people have not forgotten. The kids, our translator, um, lived in the prefecture, not in the city, but in schools. The kids just learned the history. Less so in some of the other cities in Japan, but more so than um, most other parts of the world. There at the there was a march and a rally. I think I have some pictures of that too. And at the assembly of this 2,000 people where David was one of the speakers, there was groups of high school kids who made speeches, and they carried banners and spoke very earnestly about preventing nuclear war. So it's in the consciousness all these decades. The survivors, the people who were present or nearby in when on that day, are called Bakasha. I think that's the pronunciation. And one of them spoke. He's 80 years old. He's suffering from throat cancer. He was brought in, one of the rescue workers, as a baby in his mother's arms, and so I guess that developed later. And the high school students spoke about how they had been hearing the stories of the folks who are oldest one, I think, is 85 now. So their generation is passing through. So we won't have them. They won't have them very much longer to testify what this did to their lives. I think that now our translator, we were having a heart-to-heart talk, and she said that they lived in the foothills here near here, and her mother saw the light. She wasn't, I guess the radiation didn't affect them that far away, but she saw the light. And so people who know someone who was affected, it's going down through the generations, but this may be the last generation of people who actually know witnesses. I was also thinking about my growing up in the United States in the 50s, when we had air raid, we duck and cover under our desks, and people had bomb shelters, and that is much milder experience, but it got into my psyche that this could happen anytime. And I can remember several times of reflecting that just was always in the background for us. And then we had the sense during the détente after the Cold War that, well, I did at some point, my 30s, maybe 40s, that okay, maybe that's not this horror that we have to be afraid of, the fire next time. I think David would probably say that it was always present. I think he's giving us examples. And during the day, I don't know if the pictures are up, because I think our screen is, I can't see our screen anymore. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay,
Good. Perfect.
At some point in there was a laying of putting a wreath on, I don't know what that structure is called, but in the background of one of the pictures, you can see the dome in the very background, in the middle of that stone structure. So there was a number of people coming up and putting a wreath there.
Yes, we see that.
And another one was the Korean memorial. One of the other delegates is from South Korea, and she works for an activist organization, and talked about there were 10%. I think it's 10% of the victims, the deaths were Korean. And it was interesting because our host said that, well, there were people working, they came and worked in the factories and for the war effort, but there was also forced labor. So, and the Korean woman said that there were a lot more of those people that, were also victims, as well as many other people from other cultures who were in the city when this happened. Then there was a march, and it's very hot. We also had a little discussion about how it's hotter, and we said, "Oh, it's hotter where we live too, with the climate." And I think I showed a picture of it was well attended, and at one point there was some chanting, and I was trying to follow it, but there was some chanting in English: "No more Hiroshima, no more Nagasaki, no more Fukushima, the nuclear reactor that spills, and no more Hibakusha, no more survivors because and then no more." And I had a funny moment where I think I showed the police it was very organized, and they were telling us giving some instructions, and I actually said to the host, "Are they?" I was kind of joking, but I said, "I thought maybe he was chanting something. Maybe they're on board with this," which we wouldn't expect in the other protests I've been to. And then there were the assembled 2,000 people. They're getting prepared for the 80th anniversary of the bombing, and so this organization is strong. It started out as a trade union movement. It's existed since 1950, I think. So that was impressive too. I think that's just the first day. So tomorrow there will be workshops. David is talking to somebody, as he usually does, on the river, so I'll call him over. What do you think of his suit? I changed mine
Looking
out of
good.
mine.
Tell him he's
I
looking
changed
very.
out of, I read up all about business and business casual, and you can't have your toes showing, and women have to be very modest. So we dress like that. But I think tomorrow is more like the activist workshop is when I ask the host what we should wear. All right. So we can take questions.
Okay, so
And bowing. I'm going to bow. This is how we bow in Japan.
we bow back. Let's bow back to you, Barbara. And we bow to David.
Bear with us.
Getting the picture back.
Lost the picture. There we are. Yes.
So is this a good time for the Q&A?
Yes.
Or would you like to present more to us? We do want to hear what you've got planned for the rest of the time too, but I don't know what's best to do first.
There's more activities around the actual bombing, of course, was the 6th, right? So there's more activities leading up to that. Commemorations, some workshops where we're going to talk about sort of strategic steps. How do we work on nuclear non-proliferation as a movement, right? So there's other organizations, people here from around the world, right? The Japanese are hosting. Then
Talk
we go
a
to
little more clearly, David, please, and slow down.
Sure. So where didn't you hear? Where did I leave off?
Keep going. Just keep going. Yeah, no, we heard that, but just a little reminder. And you're kind of getting out of the picture. Try and stay in the picture too.
How's that? We're working on a cell phone. So
On a tripod.
Yeah, it's a rigged tripod. Anyway, so there are going to be workshops and strategy discussions tomorrow, and then we all go over to Nagasaki and we do it again. And we're flying back the 9th or the 10th. I will be. She's going to stay around and do a little touristy thing.
for a day. I rode the bullet train.
How far away is Nagasaki?
Good question. I don't know.
The train was 4 hours from Tokyo. It's less than that to Nagasaki. I can tell that from the map.
I know from Tokyo to Hiroshima, it was an hour flight. So I imagine it's something comparable to that. I'm not really aware. I didn't look it up.
One thing also that I learned is that, why did they pick these two cities? And I think it's you who
We
told me
didn't
that
get that, Barbara. So
one question I had was why were these two cities picked? Because I think Hiroshima would be in the top 10 cities in Japan, and the answer I think you gave me was that the Allies had already bombed conventional bombs so much of the Japanese cities, and these were less touched. And then I think it was in the book, Nagasaki was not the first choice. I don't remember what it was, but the cloud cover was too high that day, and so they Nagasaki.
Nagasaki was a backup city. Hiroshima did have a military component to it here. So that was
yeah.
one of the reasons why Hiroshima was a military base or something. It didn't pose much of a threat. Nagasaki was a Catholic city, the largest Catholic city in the East, and pretty much an entirely Catholic city here in Japan. So, and it was interesting. There was a lot of racism tied up with the use of the bomb. We could have bombed Germany to end the war. We didn't do that. Did bomb the Japanese. And one of the things we do when we start a war, all countries do this, they vilify the other side. They make them less than human because it's hard for people to kill each other naturally. It's hard. It's a hard thing to do. There's a whole training program in the military teaching them how to kill each other, right? Because the actual sort of gut reaction for people is not to kill. There's exceptions to that, of course, crimes of passion and people, narcissist or whatever, professional hitmen, but that's rare. Most people, it was found over the years in the Civil War, Revolutionary War, and other wars, tended to shoot over other people's heads. But if you can make the enemy seem less than human, it's easier to kill them. It's also easier to kill them the further away you are from them. So more of these drones, long distance weapons, you're able to kill the enemy a lot easier. And the nuclear bomb, that's great, you don't have to be anywhere near it. Of course, then somebody else gets it, and now you're in trouble.
So I think we can take questions. I don't. I didn't plan any songs. And
So this might be a bigger question than what we can get into today, but it's Monica. Hi.
Hi. Monica.
We've seen what these bombs can do. We've seen the damage that radiation does to people, to our environment. We know how terribly destructive these are and how irreversible that damage is, or at least in the short term. Why do these weapons persist?
Good question. We ask ourselves that every day, those of us who are trying to get rid of it. There's a certain inertia involved in it. There's also mistrust of the other. And to be honest, some of the original reasons, what Alpovitz goes into in the book, is the kind of thing that convinced Truman to finally drop was competition with the Soviets, right? He didn't want the Soviets to move in on Japan, even though he was in Potsdam arguing for them to come in, because the idea was once the Russians came in, the Japanese would give up. But then he heard from his people during the conference that they had tested the bomb in at the test site, and it worked, and he changed his attitude. Now we have to keep the Russians out, right? So let's make an example.
And meanwhile, Japan was trying to figure out what's going on. They were getting mixed signals. Every country, the Allies were getting mixed signals. Japan was getting. their violence as they were trying to gather more information, especially about what the Russians were going to do, was interpreted as not cooperation. That book is scary to read.
So there's miscommunication and inertia. That's part of it. The other part of it is geopolitical advantage. We're still in a world where nations compete with each other, and the biggest nations have a lot more at stake. They're willing to go, what was it that Lao Tzu said? War is politics by other means, or the continuation of politics by other means, something to that effect. This gives people in power leverage and the ability to, push back to other powers. There's just too much competition. It keeps these things alive. Other things that keep it alive, money, contract. Right now, we're going through a process of nuclear modernization where we're modernizing all our nuclear weapons. We're not building up more stockpile because treaties prevent us from going over a certain amount, but we're getting rid of the older ones and bringing in new. Hugely expensive, very profitable for the defense contractor. And defense contractors very wisely figured out years ago that if they can spread the contracts out in as many congressional districts as possible, that'll help them keep it going, right? So that kind of answers your question. It's sounds trite, profit motive. It's you make a lot of money building weapons, and nuclear weapons. The ones they're building now, the Sentinel, which is the new intercontinental ballistic missile that's supposed to replace all the Minuteman missiles, which could have another 10 years of life, by the way. Over the budget already so far that the Pentagon had to come before the Congress and certify that they needed the weapon because Congress was getting ready to cut the funds. It's approaching $1 trillion over 10 years to build this new missile that we don't really need. Next question
Or reflection.
or reflection.
It's Moose.
I moves.
How are we getting rid of these old weapons, and is it even possible to get rid of them?
The old weapons, we take them down, we take them apart, they're disassembled. The warheads usually go into storage. Some of the nuclear arms agreements that we've had literally destroy some of them, and then they have to, do something with the plutonium. That's a big part of the side effect of nuclear weapons. What do you do with the waste, right? That's how we went from 70,000 deployed warheads down to about 12,000. But now it's looking like we might go the other way because of, political instability. Our government walked away from 2 arms control treaties that help prevent nuclear war. The Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty that prevented the U.S. and the Soviet Union from building and deploying intermediate range missiles, right? So an intercontinental ballistic missile will go from the U.S. to the Soviet or to the Russian. An intermediate range weapon has to be fired from, say, Turkey or France, right? Intermediate range. Those were all gone. Now that treaty was trashed by, I think, Trump. Anti-ballistic missile treaty was trashed by Bush. That was the one that said you can't have weapons to shoot the other missiles out of the sky because that will give you an advantage. Strategic Defense Initiative, Star Wars. Reagan tried to paint that as, we can protect ourselves from nuclear weapons. The Soviets were very upset about that and wouldn't agree to any of the nuclear arms agreements we were negotiating until we got rid of that because if the U.S. had a way to shoot their missiles out of the sky, that gives us the upper hand, right? We can attack them and don't have to worry about them attacking us, at least theoretically. Of course, we used to say, well, that's a dumb idea because even if the system works, it's only going to get about 90% of the weapons, right? So 10% of the weapons get through. You're talking about nuclear bombs here, not bullets. We used to say a leaky umbrella, you still get wet, right? So we were able to kill the Strategic Defense Initiative mainly on scientific grounds that it didn't work. But I'm trying to remember what the question was. How do we stop it? We stop it by going back to nuclear arms control agreements that both sides can agree to.
But I'm just
What's in our best interest?
I'm just talking about the proliferation of the ingredients of these bombs, and that we really don't know what to do with the nuclear waste. We don't.
The material.
We don't have any.
It is a problem. It is a problem. There are ways that you can deal with it. I mean, burying it real deep is one way. There's also something called glassification, where they take it and they put it into glass. They literally melt it into glass. They spread it out so that the half-life is not as exposed to people. People don't get exposed to it as easily, and it can burn out its life in these glass blocks or whatever. That's another approach. There are other approaches I'm not aware of, but there are technical ways to reduce it. But the problem is, so long as they're building new ones, they're making more plutonium. So we're creating more waste. So it's part of the problem.
David, it's Dave here.
I was just going to
Hi,
say, would
Dave.
you
Hi, Dave.
mind if we pause for a moment and light the peace candle?
Please.
Larry, would you do that? So Barbara and David were lighting the peace candle a little bit belatedly here.
Well, peace is about connections, and I think about the connections that David and Barbara are making over there, and what it's like to step for the first time into a place where thousands of people have died. Suddenly, going to school, going to work, having just had a nice breakfast with your wife or husband. You sent the kids off to school. This is what being human is all about. And it's what life is about as well. And my prayer is that we remember to live life and live it as if we forget all about death. And that David and Barbara bring back the vibrations that they have discovered, experienced, and let them shine whenever they get to our world.
Rosalind, do you want to say the credo and all the rest of that?
Barbara, did you say something?
Yeah, do you want to do the opening, the rest of the opening?
Oh,
credo?
no, that was just the only thing. It just struck me that the peace candle was sitting here unlit. So I really feel that it's important that it be lit and that Larry light it. So we do have more questions. Are you guys up for some more?
Sure. I just want to say, though, that was beautiful what Larry said. Thank you, Larry.
Yes, Larry. That's why we keep him around.
And do we have people on Zoom?
Um,
Others?
Barbara, yes? What did you say?
Do we have folks on Zoom?
We do have folks on Zoom. I shall now let you know who's here. I think we've got Gary Culp, Gary and Jen Culp, yay. Bill Talvity, hey Bill, long time no see. Sue and somebody on an iPhone, and we did have Marilyn on her tablet. Okay, yeah. And Gary Schoenberg, yeah, I think that's it. And Dave Perkins has a question or a comment.
David, regarding Moose's question, is it not so that the main problem with disposing nuclear waste comes from not necessarily from the missiles, but from nuclear plants? And Diablo Canyon out west was supposed to be where we were going to bury all this stuff, except of course, the people around Diablo Canyon do not want it there. And then also, I wish I could see David and Barbara. And then
We're in,
the Hanford facility, where a lot of nuclear bomb development was done, the area around that can't be used for hundreds, maybe thousands of years for any purpose whatsoever. But on a positive note, I want to say, and this regards Larry Hall too, and anyone else who drives a Mazda, that Mazda Tokyo Kogyo is based in Hiroshima. Zoom, zoom.
Ah, I didn't know.
can you guys see us?
Yeah, now we can.
Okay, all right. So just to touch on that, you're right, Dave. The creation of the nuclear materials is a big part of the problem that Bruce was raising. We can get rid of the weapons. We could stop, we can get all the countries to sit down and say, this is dumb. We should stop fighting each other. Let's start, dealing with climate change and buy weapons, right? But then we have to deal with the waste. The big source of the waste is the nuclear plants. You're absolutely right. And there's a big push now among the nuclear energy industry that, we have to have nuclear plants because they're renewable. They don't produce carbon and it'll help the climate change. No, there's a lot of other carbon associated with a nuclear plant. But worse than that, it's the whole nuclear waste issue. I used to be ambivalent right before I became an activist. The year I joined my first activist group, I was, but nuclear power, if you make it safe. I had this friend who I worked with, and he said, you're never going to be able to make it completely safe. No matter how safe you make the facility, something can go wrong. An earthquake, a meteor could hit the darn thing. What are you going to do then? Now, what are the chances a meteor is going to hit a nuclear power? Pretty small. But we've had a number of nuclear accidents that have caused huge damage. And
Anyone.
yeah, including one here. They're talking about a nuclear plant here that they're trying to shut down that's had leaks. And we have 3 Mile Island, we have, Fukushima. Oh, it's not going to happen. Then it happens. These are dangerous toys we're playing with, and we have alternatives now. At one time we maybe didn't, but now we do. So the choices are more obvious.
One of the speakers was addressing that today.
Okay, we've got some more questions.
David and Barbara, thank you very much for representing us in Hiroshima. In 1970, thereabouts, Daniel Ellsberg published the Pentagon Papers and revealed the black budget, which was $100 million a day that was not up for any review by Congress or even the president, and if I remember correctly, perpetuated into the future. $100 million a day for covert military activities. So this is a secret fund. Most people don't know about it, and it's food for making these implements of war, these instruments of deterrence in the minds of the military go on into the future. And I was wondering, in your study, representation, and your work with making the world more safe and getting rid of nuclear weapons, if the black budget had ever come across your consciousness, and I don't even know if it still exists. I can't imagine that they have, since it was not in the review of the Congress, it probably still exists and is probably much larger. But I'd be interested in your experience or study to see if this is part of what fuels the ongoing drive for more weapons and more the weapons race, specifically with Russia and China?
Sure. We've known about the black budget for quite a while now, in large part because of Ellsberg and others who exposed it. Congress knows about it. Not everybody in Congress is happy when the military spends money that they don't have control over, because that's Congress's main power to hold the purse strings, right? So a lot of people in Congress get upset about that, but not enough. So the black budget's been exposed. There are people who can look into it and find out what's in it, but that kind of thing still goes on. We haven't eliminated it. I think it's just under more review, so they're a little more aware of it. You know, people in the committees, we don't get to see it, but they do look at it. And if we're doing our job, as the public is doing their job and getting through to our Congress people, you know, what we want, what we don't want, what we're not willing to accept, there's a little more pressure on the institutions to use this money to use it better. It's not a complete solution. It's nowhere near enough. But I know it's possible. There was something for a while when we were in Iraq and Afghanistan called the Overseas Contingency Operations Fund, kind of modeled after the black budget, although it was not hidden. They voted on it. We knew what was in it. What it was money for the wars that wouldn't come out of the defense budget. Like, wait, isn't that what the defense budget's for? Well, we don't want to cut into our ability to build more weapons or, you know, fight 2 major wars around the world. So we'll vote for an extra pot of money that doesn't come under the restrictions of the defense budget. Because there was something called budget caps were put in there after a while because a lot of pressure to cut the military budget. We never cut it, but what we did do is get a bill through that said, well, if you're going to cut the military, you got to cut social too. And if you're going to cut social, you got to cut the military too. So it was kind of a half loaf win for us. It was like, oh, they're not going to just cutting healthcare because they'll have to cut the military as well. So it was sort of stopgap measure for us. But the Overseas Contingency Operation Fund was a way to get around that. So they just voted an extra pot of money for the wars. Well, we were finally able to get that written out of the budget about 3 years ago. So that's gone, right? If we can do that, we can get rid of the black budget too, but it needs to be exposed. People need to speak out about it. The pressure and the power we have always comes from people talking to the people in power. It always comes from there. There's no other way to do it, really. We can cease to cooperate. We can go on major strike. That's really hard to organize, and people have to eat. So, you know, we have to find targeted ways to go about these things in Congress. My fear is that we're running out of time on this stuff, and we need more people to step up and speak truth to power. That's the only, you know, hope we have. And it doesn't mean just calling and writing letters. It means going out and getting into the street and attending conferences like this, connecting with other people around the world and in your backyard. Because strength in numbers really does matter.
Okay, thank you, David. That's marching orders. And I think we can all be a little bit hopeful right now, given possible changes in the political scene. Before we leave Daniel Ellsberg, I just wanted to mention something you and I were talking about last week, David, which was that he had, in addition to the Pentagon Papers, he had a massive file, also Xeroxed surreptitiously with his kids in the office on Sunday afternoons too, but about the nuclear program. And these documents, it was actually his preference that be the thing that got published, that got put out there and released. But as it was, the Pentagon Papers was the thing that the papers ran with, or that was revealed to us. The other bunch of papers is still somewhere hidden. He hid it with his brother, Daniel Ellsberg's brother, and it's never been published. So just a thought. And Andy's been waiting patiently. And I bet we have some people on Zoom that have questions too, but we'll go to Andy Wright.
Okay. Hello? All right. Here we go. I see something different than this. I'm not thinking necessarily about the nuclear bombs, but if you fly over Southwest America, you will see mile after mile of aircraft, supposedly a very powerful aircraft that could demand control of any situation that they're involved in, and they never have been flown. They've never been taken up. They've never been had the situation where they could go out and save the world for the particular countries that they represent. And I think that one part of this that one should think about very much is that's saying something. That's saying the bombs may make a big bang, but nobody finds any usefulness for it. For example, Ukraine. Russia is always rattling nuclear vents. You know, okay, we're almost up against a corner, and any day now we'll fire off the nuclear bombs. They haven't. The United States looks at it and says, well, those nuclear bombs really aren't doing us any good. And I think America has in some way been very good about this, in the sense that we make NATO, we make big conglomerate collections of countries that then can work together. I mean, maybe they're working together in terms of making bombs and so on, but they're the part that is actually doing something, say in the Ukraine situation, is not nuclear. And it's, even though it may be the world's biggest bang or something or other, it's the people from all different parts of Europe getting together and saying, like, well, we're not going to worry about that at the moment, but we'll try to make a strong wall that includes everybody.
Would you like a response from David on that?
Yeah.
Let's switch over. Did you guys hear Andy's comment?
Yeah.
And would you
Yeah.
like to respond?
Was there a question there, Andy?
No, there wasn't a question, but
Okay.
Thank you, Andy.
I'll say one thing about that. Think of it this way. If we didn't have nuclear weapons, then we would have to fight wars if wars continue, right? So one of the things about countries with nuclear weapons is they think they can avoid it. But as I said earlier, you know, accidents happen. And these are, it would be a pretty big accident if a nuclear weapon got used by mistake, because, you know, look what just happened between Israel and Iran. Once one side gets hit, they have to have some kind of response, and then it escalates. There are think tanks in DC that study these things. They do war games, and 9 times out of 10, actually 9.5 times out of 10, when a nuclear weapon is used in any scenario, it always escalates to a full-blown thermonuclear war. These are dangerous toys to be playing with, and there's other alternatives. But as I mentioned before, there's a lot of things driving it, and we have to find alternatives to that too. This is not an easy fix. On one hand, paradoxically, it's really easy. We just have to stop doing it and find something better to do. Anyway, next question.
thank you, David and Barbara. It's Nancy with Levi on my lap. It looks
Hello,
awesome. Thank you so much for representing our community and, you know, America as a whole. And I'm just really proud of what you're doing. Thank you so much. And you look great. Have fun. See you when you get home. Bye-bye.
You have some Zoom questions?
This is Gary Schoenberg.
Hey, Gary?
Gary.
Good to see you guys. It's I'm just in awe of how you are right there in Hiroshima on the other side of the globe, and it's like you're right in front of us. Just an amazing how this
Mm.
technology works. And thank you for bringing this to us. Really appreciate the energy you both bring, and the passion and the sincerity. Really just value what you are doing there. It's just seems beyond it's beyond comprehension in my mind to see and experience this in real time. It's just it's an amazing phenomena, and I really appreciate what you're doing to bring awareness and sensitivity and rational, sane perspective. This craziness, this madness. It's hard to even comprehend the madness of nuclear. Even the thought of it is just it's the hard to comprehend how someone would even create a weapon that would wipe out all of the human existence on Earth. Uh, it's the darkest of darkness, and thank you for bringing light into that space to help illuminate and bring more awareness of how incredibly crazy that idea is, and how we need to bring sanity to this planet. Thank you so much.
Domo arigato. Gary.
Any other questions?
Yes, just, hi, it's Roseanne. And you mentioned some books that would speak of, different perspectives. Did this bomb really have to be dropped? I bought the Truman book. It's 1,000 pages long. I just haven't been able to get into it. It sounds like a little bigger of a commitment to try to get through the book. But I am interested in the other, various books that you talked about. I wonder if you possibly could get a list, written somehow, that anyone that was interested would be able to read one of them.
All right. I am now going to produce a bibliography for Pebble Hill Church.
Okay.
So look forward to that. I want to give you one book to start with if you're having a hard time with the big books.
Yeah.
Right? They are hard to get through sometimes. And sometimes they're just hard to read because they're so, they're talking about such horrendous things. But this will be a nice book to get started, and you can probably read it in an afternoon. It's more of a multi-page pamphlet. It's called War is a Racket by Smedley Butler. And it talks about really what the institution of war is about from the perspective of a decorated, retired U.S. Marine colonel. Very interesting guy, this guy. War is a Racket. So it's a good book to start with.
Thank you.
And it was fun. We had to explain to them that we were going to do this today, and because it's 12:39 at night, and then we had to borrow a Wi-Fi hotspot machine, and what is it? A church service and an interfaith church, and explaining. Oh, non-denominational. So said some more about Pebble, and I think tomorrow there's a prayer, and somebody was struggling for the word, and I think they meant prayer vigil. That's tomorrow.
That you will be attending?
Yeah.
Oh,
We
good.
say-
Now, how are we doing for your time right now? Are you ready to call it a night? Yeah.
I can take a few more questions.
Okay.
See you
Let's
later.
have somebody. Anybody who hasn't. Oh, Gary Culp on Zoom. You guys, go, Gary.
Can you hear it all right? Good. This
Yeah.
is so exciting. I think that when Rosalind said that you guys were going to be on today, I was like, we had to fix our computer because we've been having a trouble with Zoom, but we got it repaired, and it was wonderful to watch and to realize you guys are at midnight time there. And thank you for the information and for your presence there. For over the years, Pebble has been, just because of our Peace Site dedication, many years ago, we've been always focusing on this particular situation, this particular time, and having our prayers and our thoughts always. What Larry was saying about these people who live this life and all over the world is happening yet, but we have 93 days from today until the election. And I totally with Rosalind in saying this should be our major, our life focus for a while, to make sure that we don't get somebody in there who doesn't really understand what we're talking about today. So thank you all for being there and for sharing this time. It's awesome. Great. Thank you.
I just remembered the vigil is on the 6th. So think on Tuesday, that's the day that I'm with here, and then the 9th be in Nagasaki.
Yeah. So on the 6th and the 9th, be sending prayers.
May I just want to second, David, enthusiastically second your book by Colonel Smedley Butler, which is from the 20s and 30s. He was a Marine colonel. They were down in Central America overthrowing governments and killing people, mostly for united fruit. War is a racket. War is a racket. I also wanted to mention a couple things about nuclear in Ukraine. I don't know how many of you know here that when Ukraine became independent, they had nuclear bombs. They had nuclear missiles from the old Soviet Union. And in the Oslo Accords, they agreed to get rid of them if Russia would guarantee their territorial integrity. Well, that didn't last long. The other thing is, what is the dance? How much do we give Ukraine? Because Russia has tactical nuclear weapons, which they could use. They don't destroy as much, but that's what Putin would use, and come close to using if he's losing really, because if he loses his life and his country. So it's a very dangerous game that's happening in that war.
Yeah, I'm going to respond to that. I agree with you, but we need to keep the perspective in mind here, right? So my understanding, and I don't get into the White House and talk to these people, but we read a lot. We talk to other people. We talk to congressional representatives. And what the U.S. is planning, should Russia use limited tactical nuclear weapons, is a massive conventional response, which so far has been a deterrent. Although I don't think Putin in his right mind would use a tactical nuclear weapon. The question is whether he's in his right mind or not. So far, I think he is. Who knows what can happen? It just raises the bar on, or not the bar, raises the need for talks and negotiations. Keep in mind that we deconflict with the Russians all the time. When we had troops in Syria and they had troops in Syria and we were fighting different people, we'd call each other up on the phone and say, we're going to bomb these people over here, so don't bomb us while we're doing it, right? That's the way it gets. And so we prevented a war with the Russians by deciding who else we were both going to bomb. Kind of crazy stuff. We were facing off with the Soviet Union throughout the whole Cold War. We were able to sit down with them and talk to them and reduce nuclear warheads around the world and prevent a nuclear war, despite all the close calls we had. So we know it can be done. The question is, will we do it? And again, I think it always falls back on us to make sure that that happens. Because if we are complacent, those people who make profit will get away with pushing the envelope. So anyway, that's what that makes me think of.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump on Dave's comment. It wasn't Oslo, it was the capital of Hungary, right, where the agreements were signed. Okay. And the U.S. signed an agreement to also protect Ukraine's territorial integrity, just like the Soviets did. He's right. So part of the reason we fund Ukraine is to keep up our part of that deal. So that was all. I just historic facts.
Yeah, sure.
Barbara and David, thanks again. This is Bill Metler. I was really taken with the candidacy of Denis Kucinich back in the day when he proposed the Department of Peace, also a peace academy, to match the West Point and the Air Force Academy and the Naval Academy, to have a peace academy and a peace department where you have young people learning avenues and effective strategies for peace. And you have a department that's on the cabinet that sits there with the Air Force, the Army, the Navy, all those honchos that are helping to make decisions. And in that wonderful idea of how to wage peace, really, beyond obstructing weapons of war, these are active measures to pursue peace. One of which would be to embolden the Marshall Plan, again, for countries around the world, and to wage peace by giving people what they need to make a life and make a country safe and productive. And we could do this at a fraction of what is spent on elections in this country, and also a fraction of what we spend on defense. So I'm wondering, you are there with peace advocates. Is there any talk of constructive ways to wage peace and to give the people of the world the bottom of the Maslowian hierarchy of needs, to provide that across the world?
A couple of things. Barbara's going to mention one in a minute, but I want to just say that tomorrow, that's what's on the agenda tomorrow. It's workshops and discussions on what are our next steps, how do we implement a strategy. I do want to mention one other thing. The Department of Peace bill, everyone's heard of Ilhan Omar, right? We helped get her elected. We helped her write legislation her first year. I believe it's called Pathways to Peace, and it literally calls on the Pentagon to come to the Congress and rewrite U.S. foreign policy based on cooperation and compassion around the world. The bill doesn't have a lot of co-sponsors. It's one of those messaging bills that gets a debate going in Congress, but she's taken it to the next level. And then Barbara has something I think she wants. Yeah, well, she's already won her primary, and she's likely to win the general. But she's in, forget where, Minnesota, somewhere else, out west.
We can work to get more of her elected. One, ratifying the treaty for the TPNW, Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. None of the nuclear weapons holding countries have ratified it. David made a point in his talk today that if U.S. led and ratified that, Japan has ratified it. So that could cause some action. But one hopeful thing with related to Japan, I learned on the march, I asked what the current chant was, and apparently Japan, and perhaps it was right after the war, their constitution says something about not waging war. There's something in their constitution that they oppose. Maybe you know more about it. Mm-hmm. And there's a movement to change that part of the Constitution, and the activists that were there today are opposed to changing that constitution, that constitutional provision.
One detail on the TPNW, or the Treaty on Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. I didn't know that Japan actually signed it.
I know they did not.
They didn't. Okay.
They have not.
So we're not even actually talking about ratification at this point. We're talking about signing the treaty. And our position is, well, first of all, countries with nuclear weapons say, well, I don't want to be the first one to get rid of my nuclear weapons, because then, they have nuclear weapons and I don't. So it's a step-by-step process. So what we're calling on the U.S. to do is be the first to sign. Signing the treaty simply says we support its goal. Then we have to go through the whole process of ratification. And each country does that a little bit differently, but each country has to ratify the treaties that are signed. So we're saying, let's be the first to sign. That is a confidence building measure to get other countries to say, well, maybe the U.S. is serious about reducing their nuclear weapons. That would be good for me. Maybe I should sign too and see how, call their bluff, see what the next step is. That's how we got the Soviets into and they got us at the same time into negotiations throughout the Cold War by showing we were willing to take the first step. It was a matter of fact, it was Gorbachev who stopped nuclear testing to get Reagan to join that. So we stopped developing new nuclear bombs. He wouldn't. Finally, Gorbachev had to start testing again, but we were pressuring from the grassroots up, and we got legislation passed it was sponsored by Schroeder, the woman from Colorado, I forget her first name, that actually cut the funding for the tests. And we haven't tested nuclear weapons through explosions ever since. Clinton signed the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, President Clinton. It's never been ratified in the Senate. So my point is, we can sign the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, get other nuclear-armed countries to sign the treaty. That's the easy part. If we can get them all to sign, now we're on a roll. And it creates the opening and the possibility of ending these things. One last thing I wanted to say, having to do with, there's two more things I want to say, but I'm going to go back to Barbara in a second. But we're talking about the investments in what's good for people versus weapons, right? We've been walking around Hiroshima tonight. Beautiful night. I looked it up. Japan's one of the safest countries in the world. You can walk the streets and chances of small crime are very, very low. People have been walking by, stopping, watching us. We just had 2 police officers walk by. People talking to somebody.
People sitting by the river.
If this was Philly, man, they'd be like, let me see your ID. I mean, it's just a beautiful, they care about each other here. You can see it. So it's what's possible. It's all around us. Anyway, Barb.
You hear this? Can you hear the insects? Can you hear the cicadas in the background? They sound like cicadas to me, and I want to look up whether they came from Japan or not.
We're not hearing them.
No.
Okay, well they're prominent, and I guess I could end on a prayer and a wish for peace, freedom from nuclear poison for all of the species. We didn't even talk about. We saw pictures of the flattened city, all the animals, the trees, the life that has resurrected itself over these 79 years, and may it continue to do.
Oh.
I wanted to add one last thing. I know not all of you is going to get an opportunity to come to Japan. Well, if those of you who can travel and you're considering your next vacation, I would strongly urge you to come to Hiroshima, go to the Peace Museum, and check that out. I've known about a lot of the history, and I've known about nuclear weapons for years. I've been doing this all my adult life, and there's nothing. And I've read some of the stuff in this museum in books, pictures of the victims, what happened to this building, and it's nothing like what you experienced in that museum. It was shocking to me, and just has revitalized my commitment to this issue. So I would strongly encourage, if you get a chance, look it up online, the Hiroshima Peace Museum. Thank you all very much for being the beautiful people that you
David,
are.
So both of
Thank you, David. Thank you, Barbara.
So David and Barbara, stay there for 1 minute. Our heartfelt thanks to you and our love for you. We feel so honored to be represented by you and really appreciate the work you're doing. that you've done, both of you, forever now. Come home safe. Remember, lots of pictures, lots of video, any audio you can get, bring it back and share it with us when you're back. And I think we're going to continue. We've got a lot more material to do that we're not going to get to today. Maybe we'll just have part 2 next week. I don't think either one of you will be back here Sunday.
Right, I'm fine. by
Okay.
Sunday.
Okay, but we will definitely sign you up for continued sharing when you do get back and you're on the ground and you're rested and ready to go again. So thank you from the bottom of our heart. We love you and we wish you all well.
Domo arigato.
Hey, Bill, did you have something to say, Bill, out there in Zoom land? Bill Talvady. Okay. Well, how would you feel about continuing next week? I really do have some very beautiful things to share. We had a lot of music queued up, so let's have part 2, and a real sense of the survivors and some stories and some just really beautiful ideals they share still. So we'll continue.
I just want to say what Albert Einstein said about nuclear war. Now, he's a really smart guy. He's no Trump-level stable genius, but still, he said World War III would be fought with nuclear weapons, but World War IV would be fought with sticks and stones. That's all that would be left.
Yeah, I'm just reminded of something Gary Culp mentioned to me recently. You know, he's into those numbers. So 8/8 is Thursday. Very meaningful day in the world of numerology, but I mean, it has significance. And I can't remember the theme of 8, but he was suggesting, and it's not just 8/8, but 2024 reduces to 8, right? 2024 reduces to 8, so it's 888. Real big deal. And Gary was hoping that we would convene and have a prayer vigil at 8 o'clock or something. I don't know if anybody wants to do that. I'm not available, but light a candle. Hey, light a candle on Thursday for peace. We need more prayers for peace. So, okay, y'all good? All good. All right. Perfect. Thank you for Alan for managing all of that. And everybody have a good week. I know maybe you want to talk about camp stuff. I don't know. No, but anybody that wants to chat about the camp, the home camp thing, Moose has got some handouts.
I'm barely prepared for this, but I've been talking to Gary Culp, and he has some great ideas about the possibility of having a home-type camp and coming and doing activities for a week that are really, really very enticing. And I have a list of things, of possibilities here on this brochure, and I'd like everybody to take a look at it and see if you are interested.